As far as we know, Jesus never owned any property. In fact, he even said of himself that he didn't have a place to lay his head. Sounds like a person living with homelessness, doesn't it? He rode into Jerusalem on what we call Palm or Passion Sunday. Guess what? He did it on a borrowed animal. He never made any money that we know of. He didn't graduate from seminary or the university. Had no visible means of support. Not only was he living with homelessness, it appears that he was unemployed. He was jobless. And he was able to captivate and draw large crowds. But when the going got rough, only a few women stayed around while he died. After 3 years of public speaking and work, he was killed as a common criminal between two convicted criminals. And you know, when it came time for him to be buried, he didn't even have a tomb. Charity case, if I ever saw one. By the world's standards, he was an utter failure, a scandal to potential followers, but as followers of Jesus, we proclaim that he was the greatest person ever to walk on the face of the earth. And through him, and as we follow him, we know life, real life, as we've never known it before. The text reminds us, the one that Deborah read to us, that following Jesus entails risk-taking. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. Unless we're willing to risk, invest, give our very lives, if there's nothing worth dying for, do we have anything worth living for? Fred Craddock used to tell the story of going to church camp in his youth at a place called Bethany Hills. It was an inspiring time. Perhaps some of you have been to youth camp a few years ago. At the end of the week, they had a night of consecration around the lake by candlelight. And every time they sang, "Are Ye Able?" Now, I checked this week, and that hymn is not in the Myers Park hymnal. And some of you may not be sophisticated enough to know the words, so I'm going to read the first verse to you so you will have that knowledge. "Are ye able," said the Master, "to be crucified with me?" Yea, the sturdy dreamers answered, "To the death we follow thee." Well, you can imagine young people singing that song. "I'd go back to the dorm," he said, "lie in my bunk, and I would say to God, I'm able." "Are you able to give your life?" "Oh, yes, I'm able." And Fred pictured himself in front of a train and rescuing a child, swimming out to save someone from drowning. He pictured himself against a gray wall, and some soldier saying to him, "Fred, one last chance to deny Christ and live." And Fred would say, oh no, I will not deny Christ." Ready, aim, fire. The body slumps. The flag is at half-mast. Widows are weeping in the afternoon. And later, a monument is built, and people come with their cameras. "Here, Sonny, you stand over here. You stand over here where Fred gave his life for Jesus." Let's get a picture. Fred reported that he was sincere then and sincere some 50 years plus later. But he said, nobody warned me. Nobody warned me that I couldn't write one big check. I had to write 50 plus years of little checks. 87 cents here, 21 cents there, 57 cents over here. That nibbling away of the giving of one's life. It's one little decision here and here and there and there. And before you know it, you've reached retirement. And did anybody notice that you've given your life? Did anyone notice at all? Those little checks? You see, it's usually not one big decision. It's a lifetime of little everyday decisions that end up being a large decision. Those checks add up to a large number that paint the picture of our lives and determine whether or not at the end of the day we can be counted as faithful. But let me say, what's true for the individual is also true for this church. It takes the writing of those small checks of faithfulness regularly. But if we do, we have the promise of productivity. When the seed goes into the ground, it appears to have died, but then something magical happens, something wonderful happens. It's transformed and life emerges. Amazing amounts of fruit from one small grain. But nothing can happen until it takes that risk, gives itself up, so to speak, by trying to save, to secure, to keep. We give up life. We lose that which we attempt to gain. We end up living fearful lives, clutching to everything, fearful that we're going to lose our place, lose our status, lose. And so we seek to secure ourselves and live selfish, narcissistic lives. Myers Park Baptist Church is going to have to take some risks to do greater things for God's kingdom. You can't look back and count on past glory to take you forward. What worked 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago most likely will not work now. The times that we are the most productive are usually the times that we don't remember, when we're least aware of it. At the wonderful reception for Diane and me last Sunday, Scott and Catherine got up and told some stories that I didn't remember. It's the small things. It's the small things that are important. Several years ago, I was chair of the board of directors of a Baptist-oriented newspaper. We had a board meeting in Kansas City. The president of William Jewell College in a suburb of Kansas City, a little town called Liberty, Missouri, where I'd served as associate years ago, invited the board to his back-to-school picnic that he hosted every year for faculty and new students. And so I get in line, not the first. I try to kind of be a little bit, not to be greedy. And while I'm in line, Otis Miller comes up behind me. Otis, chair of the business department at William Jewell College. He said, "You remember what you did several years ago on a Sunday morning?" I said, "No, Otis, I have no idea." He said, "Well, my daughter was on the way home from Baylor University and her car broke down in Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I came to church that Sunday and told you that I didn't know how we were going to get that car fixed, repaired, so she could get on to Liberty. And I said, oh, Otis, I know C.D. Ashcraft. He lives in Ardmore. He's the father of one of my closest friends, Randy Ashcraft. Let me call C.D. Now, folks, this was in the day when you had to remember long-distance phone calls? Some of you are old enough to remember long-distance phone calls. So I made a long-distance phone call to C.D. And C.D. got the car fixed that Sunday, wrote a personal check to pay for it, told her to have her parents send him a check when she got home. I had no memory of that. But Otis Miller did. Because if you do something for my child, I'll remember you. And it was something that any one of us would have done. It was about an 8 or 10 cent check at most that I wrote that day. And the church paid for the long distance phone call. But any one of us in this room would have done exactly the same thing. Just small. It may be small to you and me, but it's big if you're her daddy. The whole secret, I think, is to remember that we ultimately aren't judged by the world's standards. By them, remember, Jesus was just an utter failure. Thomas Edison once said that the key to success is to increase your rate of failure, taking risks, giving of ourselves, letting God take care of the success, even when we're down to the last day of our lives, having given every ounce of ourselves and we have nothing positive, at least we don't think, no visible results. We have God's assurance that what we have offered in Jesus' name will not be nothing. It all comes down, as the text reminds us, that we need to see and hear Jesus if we're to follow him. In the text, early in the text, the Greeks want to see Jesus. And the crowd around in verse 29 said it thundered when a voice spoke from heaven. Others said, an angel has spoken. One person's angel is another's thunder. It makes a huge difference what we see and hear, and whether or not we're willing to take risks and allow God to use those efforts in God's good time. Because from the beginning to the end of Scripture, from the beginning to the end, time and time again, it's a story of people who are willing to take a risk and step out of their comfort zone, be challenged so that good and healing and health and a future could begin to happen. Willing to let something die so something new can be born. It all may appear as failure to the world, but the world does not have the final say. God's redeeming love appears foolish to the world, but God's kingdom exists because of a sacrificing love, a life-spending, life-giving love, which is the only true measure of success. Myers Park, how will you measure success? My prayer is that you will be willing to let the old die and something new and vibrant to be born. I pray that Myers Park will be full of disciples ready to write those small daily checks of faithfulness. You know, the secret to a vibrant children and youth ministry is people in the church willing to write those small checks and do it faithfully. In the last church that I served as installed pastor, we had no young adults to speak of. By the time I left, we were having 15 to 25 in Sunday school every Sunday. And guess what? It wasn't because of my marvelous preaching. The reason we did was because two couples, empty nest couples, looked around and said, we don't have any young adults. We're going to make that happen. And guess what they did? They created community. And before you knew it, they were grandparents. They were grandparents because those young adults started having children. And guess what? Then we had a nursery with children in it. Because two couples said, we're willing to write those checks. This is Pentecost Sunday, Founders' Day of the church, the birthday of the church, the beginning of the Church of Jesus Christ. And if you are willing to step up and write those little checks of faithfulness, the birthdays of Myers Park will continue long after you and I are gone. That's my prayer for you. Well, guess what? You've heard lots of Fred Craddock stories. You're going to hear one more. Toward the end of his life, Fred said, you know, when I was in my late teens, I wanted to be a preacher. In my late 20s, I wanted to be a good preacher. Now that I am older, I want more than anything else to be a Christian, to live simply, to love joy generously, to speak truthfully, and leave everything else to God. That's what Fred calls success. How about you?